Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the third installment of Memory Bridge. So happy you're joining us today. Uh, this is compelling stuff, and I hope you're using it in your daily life and in your profession. I know we do here at Sunnyview on a daily basis, and I'm so happy we're getting a good turnout. Last week, we had 50 people on the call. So that's amazing, and it looks like we're getting close to that number now. So if you want to forward this information to folks to join us, please feel free to do that. And then following this meeting, we will send out the recordings to folks that want it and for folks that were not able to join the call. And I hope you are getting our emails. Jamie Schoen should have sent the email to all of you last week with the link to the videos and the link to this meeting. And we'll do that again this week. So thank you for joining us. And without further ado, Michael, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Bill. Those of you that I've seen now a couple of weeks, good to see you again. And for the new folks, we're glad to have you. I want to just recognize quickly, one, that this conversation is part of the outreach of Memory Bridge. And Memory Bridge is a nonprofit that I founded in 2004 for the purpose of ending the emotional isolation of people with dementia. And our aspiration is to heal with companionship what medicine cannot cure. We make a distinction between a disease for which many people in many contexts are seeking to find a cure. We make a distinction from disease and dis-ease. And the dis-ease concerns the experience that people with dementia and their carers have. So while the disease relates to whatever's going on in the brain, sometimes it's thought to involve protein accretions between neurons and that block neuronal activity. While people are working on that front with cause and effect dynamics, we're invested in causing positive change to things that can't be cured, but that can nevertheless be healed. And we believe that the companionship of another person, and more particularly another person with an attitude that's free of judgment, that's filled with genuine interest in the other person, someone in that frame of mind and that deportment of self can go a long way making a change in a person's life that no amount of medicinal or technological intervention can affect. So that's what we're all about. And the second way that we go about our work is through educational initiatives like this one. So that's the context. I want to again thank Gene, my friend Gene, and Richard Eckert. They were visionary and gracious. Certainly Gene was visionary to enable this kind of event to take place virtually now, but here before, this was and will be again an experience that takes place in Cupertino with residents of Sunnyview, and it's Gene's contributions that have enabled that to happen. And we appreciate Richard just being the kind of companion to Gene. Richard experienced dementia, and through that, Gene was motivated to make a contribution, and I am just so grateful to have been able to meet her before she passed away, and thankful for her vision that enables today to take place. Okay, we're at the third week of our 4-week series. The first week we explored what person-centered care actually means. If I had to distill that in a simplest way possible, I would put it this way: that each of us have something that's called personhood, and we can think of personhood perhaps as a sense of self-worth. But this personhood is not something that's in our brains. This personhood is something that other people enable us to have by the way they communicate to us. And why that's interesting is it makes the point that our identities are not in our brains, that our identities are in our relationships. And without another person relating to us, we won't have a sense of self or personhood. And so an aspect of care should be, if it's comprehensive, dedicated entirely to maintaining and supporting another person's personhood. Over and above whatever is done instrumentally to meet biological needs, which are absolutely also vital, obviously, there is another need we have. We can call it existential, and this can only be met by the company of another person in a particular frame of mind and spirit. That was our first week. The second week, we discussed principles of validation. Again, if I was going to distill that in a pithy way, at the heart of validation is the conviction that people behave because of reasons, not simply because of what's going on with brain cells, that people behave because of reasons, and there is nothing about cognitive impairment that precludes that fact, that people behave for reasons. And secondly, the principal motivation behind our behaviors are efforts to meet needs, particularly unmet needs. So what does that mean operationally? That means when we see someone acting in a certain way, we should assume, at least a place to begin, is that person is acting in the way he or she is for a reason. And at the heart of that reason is a need that is seeking to be met. And this week is we're going to concentrate on validation techniques. So validation communication principles that are related to the philosophy that I just mentioned. And we'll also explore 3 skills of presence. So we could say we're moving into something that has to do with techniques, but I want to stress that these techniques can only be effective, if we're going to use that word, if they are a part of something that is not a technique, and that is a particular mindset and a particular spirit. Let me stress this before I go any further. There is no magic formula for quote unquote managing the behaviors of people with dementia. There is no set of tools that if you get the tools and you use them in the right way, they will do X, Y, or Z. That kind of talk, which unfortunately is somewhat ubiquitous, even in the field, suggests that when someone is diagnosed with cognitive impairment, that they become a kind of thing. You know, if we watched, what's the guy, Caesar, the dog whisperer? Well, Caesar will go on and he'll show you the formula that dogs are pack animals and that you need to be the alpha, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. Well, that's great, I suppose, for dogs. But people with dementia don't become animal-like, and they certainly don't become object-like. So while there are certainly very precise technical things that a person can incorporate into care, I want to stress that these do not work like tools in a toolbox. These are techniques in the sense of ways of doing something, but to do things with a particular understanding in mind and with a particular attitude and spirit in place. If you take the spirit out of the equation, all of the techniques in the world might not only be ineffective, they could actually be dehumanizing. If you approach someone as if you're going to manipulate their behavior, you're sending a message to them, essentially, that their identity or personhood is sort of beside the point because I need to get your body to do something. Well, you can imagine if enough people related to you as if your sole sort of contribution was to be a body that needed to move to X, Y, or Z, after a while, you may not feel too good about yourself. I should mention that roughly 40% of people with dementia experience clinical levels of depression. I mention that because even though we may not be able to eliminate certain kinds of cognitive changes that are related to neurodegenerative processes, there's much we can do about something like depression insofar as it relates to a person's interpersonal milieu or relationships. And a significant degree of depression can be attributed directly to the quality of one's relationships. All of that to say, if you and me use techniques that dehumanize people, we may or may not get them to where we want them to go, but in the course of doing that, we could exacerbate a feeling of being unwanted or being rather useless. So I want to stress, we're going to talk about techniques, but these are not magic formulas to be applied in the absence of a certain frame of mind and spirit. Okay, I want to start out with sharing with you a brief video that we saw last week. I just want to share it again because, one, it's inexhaustible in its import and what it can teach, but two, just to establish what's possible, including in this case with someone who was just 3 months away from passing away. So here we go. I'm going to get a little help here.
When people are very old and deteriorated and no one enters their world and they're just sitting there, they will withdraw inward more and more. And their desperate need for connection is all now inside. And if a person is all alone, even if they're very, very deteriorated, there's a longing for this kind of closeness. Mrs. Wilson? Hello. You want me to sit? Can you see me good? Gladys Wilson is a wonderful example of a person who is in the phase of repetitive motion, where people use movements, repetitive movements, because they don't have any more speech or very little speech, but they have human needs that need to be expressed. You're crying. Crying, you have a tear right here in your face. You have a little pain, you don't want me to touch you. You're very sad. Can you see me? Is it scary? You afraid? And if this person sits with their eyes closed, rocking back and forth, and maybe there's a tear coming down, there's a need there. There's a little tear that's coming out. Do you feel it? You feel a little tear? If you gently use touch, and I touched Gladys Wilson for the fingertips right here on the cheek, is where the mother usually touches a child. If you touch an infant there, it looks up, and every cell remembers where it was touched by the mother. And often that person knows, even if they can't say a word at that moment, they won't talk, or they don't want to talk, but there's a communication, and that person is no longer alone. Can you let me in a little bit? You think? Just a little? You think I could be with you and Jesus for a minute? Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. I used music, because when speech is gone, music, especially with Gladys Wilson, it was religious music, because there's emotion tied to it and safety tied to it. So I used her old church songs. Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. The Bible tells me so. What I did was, when she moved, I moved with her. And when I was singing, because she didn't sing with me, so I matched the intensity of my voice to the intensity of her movement. And pretty soon, for a split second, we became one person. Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. The Bible tells me so. So at one point, when she got very quiet and very peaceful, and my voice became very quiet as hers and very peaceful, and my breathing slowed to her breathing, she pulled me to her, and I moved with her. And for her at that moment, I believe I was a symbol of her mom. Can you open your eyes now? Can you see me? Feel safe more? The whole world in his hands. He's got 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 the mothers and the fathers. He's got the mothers and the fathers in his hands. He's got the mothers and the fathers in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands. The breakthrough doesn't happen every time. The person will not always open their eyes and look at you. But if you keep trying and you keep centering yourself and really look at that person and really mirror their movements, maybe not this time, but the next time you come, you'll have a communication. You feel safe. You feel safe with Jesus and me.
If we were in a workshop context, what I would do right now is just hit pause from talking myself, and I would invite you and the audience to share the things that you noticed in this interaction with Naomi. And I think that would be a very fertile conversation. But since we don't have that space, I'm just going to share a few things that occurred to me. Number one, if we were to say, what is it that you notice that Naomi's doing? I would note that the first thing she's done is not visible, but crucial. And namely, Naomi has assumed that Miss Wilson was a person who needed companionship. Now that's already a huge, seems simple. But when it comes to someone being diagnosed with dementia, it's not so simple. And when it comes to someone who is in the visible condition that Mrs. Wilson is in this space, it's for some reason less easy for people to imagine that Miss Wilson is one, a person just like we are, and two, therefore, it stands to reason that she might very well enjoy a friend. There's something about that label and that changes in our mind the kind of people that we imagine people with dementia are, almost as if they became a different species. Now, that's not true for everyone. It may not be true for you, but it's true for a lot of people. And unfortunately, it's true for a lot of people who are in the caregiving field. I may have mentioned that the person who owned this community, this residential care where this was filmed, the owner, when he saw this interaction, said, "I can't believe it." He knew it was, of course, not forged or made up, but he said, "I've passed that woman for almost every day for a year now, and I never once imagined that she was that there." And he said, "I'll never pass another one of my residents again without speaking to them in a meaningful way. So if that's someone who is in the industry so deeply as to have their own residential community, and they are harboring the assumption that at a certain point someone disappears as a human and or simply a body, well, you can imagine how pervasive that kind of assumption is. So the first thing, in other words, was a frame of mind that Naomi, a frame of mind that made possible what we witnessed. Without that frame of mind in place, we would not have witnessed what we witnessed. And I want to stress that because that's the foundation. Number two, this is not an exhaustive list. These are things that occur to me. Number two, it occurred to me that Miss Wilson at point A, let's say before Naomi or when they just met, versus Miss Wilson at point Z, at the climax of this interaction. And I might mention this is the first time these two ladies had ever met. That Miss Wilson in point A looked like a very, very different Miss Wilson than the Miss Wilson at point Z. In fact, you could say, and not entirely metaphorically, the Miss Wilson at point A seemed to be in a state of living death. The Miss Wilson at point Z was very obviously, completely, fully, and joyfully alive. Now, let me say that the difference between Miss Wilson at point A and Miss Wilson at point Z did not involve medicine, and it did not involve technology. This is a crucial point to underscore what a kind of companionship can do to the human being, not only emotionally and spiritually, but biologically, because the biological and the emotional and the spiritual are simply inextricable at some level of lived life. So for me, that says there is much that can be done about the lives of people with dementia without a miracle cure landing in our lap. And if we're waiting for that kind of magic intervention, I think we will have misserved the people we're called to care for. Third thing, what comes to mind real quickly, you could watch this and think, isn't music magic? Well, indeed, I think music is magic, but I would stress that Naomi was not using music in the sense of walking into the room and putting a musical device on Miss Wilson's ears and letting music be the caregiver. Music was an element of a larger interaction that was effective in the way that it was because of a certain kind of spiritual atmosphere and feeling tone. We could call it empathic resonance. You could see, I think, very clearly that Miss Wilson and Naomi slowly got into a kind of rhythm, a rhythm of body, but also you could imagine a rhythm of feeling. They started to synchronize. Well, it was only once that synchronization and the trust that grew, that was the foundation of that. Only when that was in place was the overture of music effective in the way that it was. So I want to just say that even though we might be inclined to say, what was the trick? What was the secret? How did she do it? The truth of the matter is there probably isn't a secret. There probably is someone with a great deal of love who was not so preoccupied about what this might look to people looking on, to go into a uncomfortable, perhaps, situation for most people, and simply love this woman on terms that she could also participate in, and built a kind of friendship or a companionship that then motivated Miss Wilson to share. In other words, how long has Miss Wilson been waiting for someone to show up in her life that was interested in Miss Wilson, and not only to get her to the breakfast table, or not only to get her medicines, or not only to shower her? It could have been months that Miss Wilson has been in a condition of emotional isolation. We could see it took a little period for Miss Wilson to trust Naomi, and I think what she may well have been trying to find out is this person for real? I mean, does this person really care about me? What's going on here? You could imagine if you had come to believe that you were going to live out the rest of your life as basically an object to those around you. And then out of the blue, someone shows up who begins to communicate with you as if you were a person with equal worth. You might think that's too good to be true. And you might not want to risk coming out only to be disappointed. So I think once Miss Wilson became convinced that Naomi Fowle, or whoever this woman was, is seriously, meaningfully wanting to connect with me, then I think something inside of Miss Wilson, if you could just say like a switch, came on, and we saw a different Miss Wilson. I believe there are millions of people around this world right now that are waiting for people to show up so that switch can be flipped on. And I'm further suggesting that we don't have to wait for medicine or technology to start flipping switches, because the magic will be in us, and it will be pretty simple at the end of the day, I think. So those are some things that just come to my mind. Nevertheless, it's also the case that Naomi was doing specific things. So I want to look at some of those specific things with you, because these are things that you could incorporate in certain contexts. But before I do that, I want to share with you one more interaction. One of the challenges of showing interactions with people with dementia is that there's no such thing as people with dementia in general. So if you show someone that's in a particular clearly cognitively compromised condition, then folks might say, yeah, but my mother's not like that. She's not like Miss Wilson. Okay. So, but if you show somebody that's, let's say, particularly obviously lucid in many, many ways, then other folks will say, yeah, but you don't understand. It gets a lot worse than that. So what I've tried to do is pick folks and interactions on different ends of the spectrum. So this next interaction with a lady named Sally, Sally's in a different place cognitively, as all people will be, than Miss Wilson. But let's take a peek at that, and then we can look at some specific techniques.
I'm so sorry if that's not a right way to be. But they do kind of indicate weakness and tears. Weakness and tears have their place. Tears have their place. But you're better off if you don't cry easily. Don't you think so? You don't.
I think wise people can cry.
You're very kind. Very kind. I'm sitting here embarrassing myself because it's coming out of every.
You're teaching other people to show how they feel.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
I hope that's not bad.
What do you think?
Well, there are reasons that I cry. I don't understand myself so much. I know it's not bad to cry at sometimes, but sometimes it indicates weakness, and you kind of don't admire that too much.
When you say weakness, how do you mean?
That you are not demonstrating strength. Really kind of not demonstrating strength. But sometimes other people that are not crying don't know at all about that person who's crying. They don't know. I'm not saying that they are weak, but there are things of the soul that other people don't know. And possibly they never will know. But the tears may just come. And I am making a fool out of myself.
No, you're teaching me. You're teaching me.
I shouldn't say that like that, I guess. But I see kindness all over your face. And I see understanding all over your face. And I am so sorry that I am weeping out of my nose, out of my mouth, out of my eyes.
And maybe out of your soul.
Could be.
Is your soul weeping for something?
Yes. May I keep it to myself?
You don't want to say.
I can keep it to myself. Thank you.
You think love is part of that? What are they saying?
Is it proper if I ask for a Kleenex?
Right here. It is proper, and you have one right there.
I apologize to you, please.
Because I'm learning from you. Did your mother have that soul? The same soul?
Yes. Oh, yes.
She said you were special.
Yes, and she was a very good and kind person. But I'm so sorry that I am crying because it really is a sign of weakness, I think. But, people just don't understand. And it could be a sign of weakness, but people don't always understand. I don't criticize them for it, but they just don't understand.
What don't they understand?
That you have a cause for crying. However, you don't always understand it yourself. And it becomes sometimes a little embarrassing. But I used to apologize for tears, but I don't anymore. But anyhow, I am happy now, and I find you extremely kind and a little sensitive, which a little sensitiveness comes with crying often.
Mm-hmm. When you need somebody to be with you, and sometimes that makes you cry.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And you're grateful that you have somebody with you.
Yes.
And that brings the tears to you.
Yes. Your face is so kind and so full of understanding. I want you to know that.
Should we sing together a minute? Jesus loves me,
This I know, for the Bible tells me so. Little ones to him belong. They are weak, but he is strong. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. For the Bible tells me so. And I think I'm silly enough to think he loves me, although I don't give him all that I should give him, but he still loves me.
Well, again, I would prefer that we could talk through this together. I want to stress that this level of reality and intimacy, there's no such thing really as an expert on communicating with people with dementia, because what we're talking about now is love, right? And life. And I don't know who's an expert on love and life. I'm guessing that we all have experiences that give us unique understandings, which is to say the expertise is between us and among us and doesn't exist in any one single person. That's the difference, I suppose, with considering what it means to care at this level versus imagining that care is a set of tools in a toolbox with a formula that you can learn from the expert on the formula. And I know that's a good way to sell service and products, and I know that's how marketing works. But the truth of the matter is that people with dementia are more complex by virtue of being human beings than any way to package them so that it leads to the sales of service and products. So I just want to stress that I'm going to be talking now, but it's not because I'm an expert on all things related to people finding each other in love. So that said, the first thing that comes to my mind again is the difference between Sally at point A when the conversation begins and Sally at point Z when it ends. This was really about a 6 or 7 minute period, and yet I'm seeing two very different Sallys. The first Sally seemed so insecure that she seemed to imagine that, one, she was crying, but two, that the crying was proof that she really wasn't worthy of being there. In other words, she felt so much insecurity that even her feelings were understood by her to be signs of weakness. And yet that's the same Sally within a 7 or 8 minute period who is singing a cappella. Not only singing a cappella, doing so fearlessly, and furthermore, then speaking with the kind of authority that I think one would associate with a pastor or with a coach or someone in a position of leadership. Again, that's an 8 minute period. Sally at point A, Sally at point Z, no medicine was involved. How much difference could the lives of people with dementia be around the world if we went from point A to point Z in this kind of way? And it is absolutely impossible for me to believe that that is not possible. I mean, of all of the challenges on the planet, is there any challenge involving this much potential suffering that is more solvable than this? I can't think of one. In other words, this is something that we can do something about right now by going to people who feel they no longer belong and matter, and by the nature of our love for them, demonstrating otherwise. This is a very possible, doable thing. So what keeps us from doing that? Well, that's another source of subject, and perhaps an inexhaustibly interesting one. But I just want to say to myself, we're very much in the realm of the doable here. This is not David Copperfield doing tricks, or this isn't NASA putting people on the moon. This gives me hope. I find it inspiring. Okay, so those are some thoughts that just come readily to mind. Now I want to share and just focus on several techniques that Naomi was incorporating into her relationship building interactions. Here are 6, this is not an exhaustive list, but these are 6 validation techniques. I'll go over them briefly here as a list and then circle back and expound on several of these. Number 1, centering. What makes this number 1 is that when we enter into interaction with anyone, we do so by bringing what's going on in our universe into the interaction. So what's going on emotionally, what's going on circumstantially, and those things that are going on in our life can make a significant impact on the interaction, even if we're not aware of it. In other words, we might have a lot going on subconsciously or really just very consciously that ends up being an impediment to attending to the other person. We can be so deeply preoccupied with what's off stage that we never actually are on stage, even if we're standing right beside someone or right before someone. So centering allows us an opportunity to just shift atmospheres interiorly. So however busy I am, I need to take a few moments and at least temporarily let those things go so that when I'm communicating with the other person, I am as present as I can be and I'm not being distracted by the situation that I have brought in to the meeting. So that's what centering accomplishes. I'm no expert on meditation, but as Naomi describes it, it's a very simple process, 2 or 3 minutes of pausing whatever you're doing and become mindful of one's breath. Many of you probably know this much better than I do in a far more sophisticated way, but it's just a matter of focusing on one's breath. When a thought arises, which they will, it's simply to acknowledge it and let it go and then return one's attention to one's breath. Again, the purpose here is not to become a yogi. The purpose here is to clear some space. You know, we can have so much baggage we can't cross the road to meet the other person. This is a little period of releasing some of that baggage. Number 2, you will have noticed that Naomi was making sustained eye contact that in itself was profoundly communicative. I think everyone can agree that there was 100% authenticity in everything Naomi was doing, and that doing included the eye contact that she was making with Sally. And through, as they say, windows of the soul, Sally, and you know, this is true also for Mrs. Wilson, even a blind person will see when you're really concentrating on him or her. They will see it by feeling it. So the eye contact is not a trick. It's simply a means by which you can communicate to the other person the degree to which you are entirely present and the degree to which they are entirely acceptable. You know, we are the most emotionally sophisticated organisms in the galaxy that we are aware of. We are very attentive to the degree to which people are authentically communicating with us. Even a tincture of patronizing, a tincture of condescension, we feel it. Even if we didn't consciously catch it, we feel it. So there is no way of faking it to making it here. And another thing I might add, because it's true for me, we're not accustomed necessarily to making sustained eye contact with people. So this is a swimming upstream a little bit when it comes to social norms. Now, I want to stress too that Naomi did not look like she was stalking Sally or Miss Wilson. Okay, so making eye contact is not a, you know, a predatorial kind of stare down. This has to come out of a space of deep responsiveness so that you're constantly in tune with the way the other person is experiencing you. But I can say in every instance I've watched Naomi interact with someone, she very, very dedicatedly finds face-to-face space and time. There's something about that face-to-face that sort of turns out the outside world and turns on this new world between us where things can get really intimate. And if we're too self-conscious or preoccupied with what it looks like to other people to move into that space, well, then we're probably not going to be able to be person-centered carers, because we'll just be too caught up with what it passes for normal to other people. One of the things I like about, I just deeply admire about Naomi is when she goes to meet someone, whoever she's meeting, she doesn't really care what it looks like to the people looking on, because she didn't go to meet the people looking on. So that's a note to self. You sort of kind of got to care more about making a connection than passing for normal to an outside observer. And this involves eye contact. Here's an idea that use non-threatening factual words to build trust. What are those words? Well, they're virtually all the newspaper words, but why? So who, what, when, where, and how. Now, I want to stress that this is a guideline and there may very well be exceptions. Any kind of rule that you try to apply to human beings is also going to be wrong. So please know, this is not the kind of thing where you tell your neighbor, you should never ask a person with dementia why. In general, if you're trying to establish a kind of emotional rapport, a why question becomes rather analytical and abstract, and also can put someone in a position of feeling judged as if they needed to come up with a good reason of why. Well, in this particular instance, that's not of the essence. What we want to do now is establish some resonance, some empathic resonance, and it's not helpful if someone needs to step back and become particularly analytical about those kinds of motivations. So, for instance, let's say an 80-year-old woman who tells her daughter that someone is stealing her jewelry. Well, you could imagine the daughter asking, well, now, mother, why would anyone want to steal your jewelry? Or why do you think that? You could imagine all kind of why questions, but you could also imagine not asking why and explore where one's mother's coming from. So you might ask, well, who, mother, is stealing your jewelry? And let's say your mother says, well, you know, that housekeeper, that good for nothing Betsy. Well, mother, you could ask, why would Betsy want to steal your, oh, we're getting the why world again, and we've just basically stepped out of what mom is trying to communicate to sort of basically chastise mom for having such a ridiculous idea. Well, you can imagine that's probably not particularly helpful for rapport building. So you might ask, what mother did Betsy steal? Now notice that you're not fibbing. You're using what your mother has told you and rephrasing it and asking her. You're not making up a scenario. You're following what your mother has shared with you. That's crucial point here. So let's say, well, she stole my wedding ring. You might say, well, okay, well, we know we're not going down that road. You might say that wedding ring, that's the one that Dad gave you. You love that ring, mother. When did Dad propose to you and give you that ring? Again, you're not making up a scenario. You're exploring what matters to your mother by asking questions that enables her to express some feelings. Because I think we can all acknowledge that, one, either the wedding ring was stolen, or two, it's of emotional importance to your mother. That is real. Whether or not anyone stole the ring, what's real is it matters to mom. And I'm giving mom a chance to express that without any ounce of condescension or doubt in the veracity of her feelings of what she's expressing. Well, Dad gave me that over dinner in Cleveland, and it was an Italian restaurant. Well, now what's going on here? Mom is having an opportunity to share what is obviously important to her emotionally. And that is a way of establishing a kind of trust. At one level, it's very likely that your mother knows that Betsy's not stealing her wedding ring. It may very well be that mom is putting the wedding ring away so that she could have a conversation like this. You know, people who go with deep unmet needs for too long will seek out interactions because they're dying to have a meaningful communicative experience with somebody. So one thing that's going on here is that there's probably an unmet need. Mom wants to be loved like she used to be loved when dad was around. That need is probably finding its expression in the context of this missing wedding ring. In other words, this might make a whole lot of sense, really, emotionally. And as a communicative partner, we need not set ourselves up in a position of being judgmental and trying to tell someone that that's just a fantasy. On the other hand, let me stress, it is absolutely antithetical to validation principles to lie to a person for whom we are caring. This does not build trust, okay? They call it therapeutic fib in some circles. If you start fibbing to somebody, oh, you know, that's their bad day. Oh, look, listen, your sister's going to come in 30 minutes and then it's going to, and you know that their sister's not going to come. At one level, because their sister's passed away, okay, but you know they love their sister and that makes a person feel better. One level, that person knows their sister passed away. They help bury their sister. At another level, they so much wish it would be true that maybe they will go along with it because it feels. In other words, people have awareness at multiple levels. You should never imagine that a person is less aware than they really are, and you shouldn't lie to someone because lying does not build trust. But there is ways, just as I demonstrate with respect to asking mother about what was stolen and who stole it and when did dad give you that, not a single one of those questions is fibbing. Those are sincere questions about what someone is feeling. So I want to say that there is a difference between saying, mother, no one stole your wedding ring, and, oh, mother, isn't it lovely to be married to dad? Isn't he a sweet man? Both of those are not validation. Validation is establishing a legitimately meaningful conversation that is growing out of what someone is feeling and attending to that person so that he or she has an audience to communicate what it is that he or she is feeling. I wouldn't expect any of us to be able to master this overnight, but it's nevertheless helpful to talk through these things. Rephrasing, I just gave an example of rephrasing simply by saying back, if your mother says that her jewelry is stolen, your jewelry is stolen, mother? What jewelry was stolen? Well, you're rephrasing. You could imagine a man going to a mechanic, furious, and saying, my car is having gear troubles and you just fixed it last week. I'm not going to spend another red cent until you get this car running right. Now, if this mechanic happens to know this gentleman has dementia, perhaps the mechanic has a deep understanding that there's a high probability that this gentleman's feelings about his car may well be expressing all kinds of emotional needs, and the car becomes a symbol. For instance, he could imagine that this man identifies with his car, and he himself is in some ways breaking down in little ways, but maybe he's not a person who can accept that. So all of a sudden, not only is it his car that has problems, it's the mechanic who is not being responsible to his car, and a lot of fury is coming to the mechanic. Well, you could imagine getting into a tussle about, I just fixed your car. There's nothing wrong with your car. I don't know about your eyesight. Okay. Or you can imagine saying something like, well, Mr. Crawford, I know that that car matters to you and you expect to have a first-rate vehicle. That's right, I do. And I don't intend to pay another red cent. It was running fine just last week. Rephrasing. So your car was running fine just last week, Mr. Crawford? That's rephrasing. This allows Mr. Crawford to keep sharing his feelings. And that's what's of the essence right now. We can get to the car business, but there's something else more than just the car going on. And I'll use that as an example. There always is more than just the car going on. because it's true for all of us. These things in our life get charged with emotional feelings. And what we want to do is match the tone of voice, the cadence, and we want to rephrase because one, that assures the other person that we're tuned in, but it also gives an opportunity for a relationship to be built between us. You see, I could be trying to figure out the car, which is important, but I could also be trying to build a relationship, which is probably more important. And that's the key here, that no matter what the particulars are, there is always the particular of a relationship to be built. And the way we communicate with somebody is going to be whether or not the relationship is built. The details, well, that's another thing. So let me give you an example from real life real quickly. I took a group of girls who had learned from Naomi, and Naomi went with us. We went to a care home, residential care home, and the care home had singled out 5 particular people and put them in a private room, a dining room area. The girls, Naomi and myself, came in, and these girls had learned all of these techniques from Naomi and principles. And so quickly, through brief interactions, Naomi established some rapport with each of the people, and then she handed off the conversation to one of these girls so that they could practice. One of these girls, I love this story, was a Mormon. She was she held herself with a great deal of, well, she just was a proper person, you could say. She never used cuss words. She didn't hang out with the party crowd. It was just a very gentle kind of young lady, but she had learned about rephrasing. And the person that she was meeting, this lady, was telling her, this young girl, about her sister. And at some point, the lady says, and this little girl's name is Brooke, the lady says to Brooke, and my sister is a goddamn son of a bitch. Well, I'm watching this. I have no idea what's about to happen, but Brooke is a good student. She is looking in this lady's eyes, and she said, your sister is a goddamn son of a bitch? Now, I can assure you that Brooke had probably never said that word in her life, okay? But not only did she rephrase, she met the cadence and the same affect that this woman offered it. It was an absolute amazing example of rephrasing. And in any case, the point is, by doing that, you're opening up and building a space in which someone can share their feelings without feeling that you're giving them a mini mental exam. Can you imagine if someone interacts with us and the whole time they have the feeling that we're trying to figure out what stage they're in? Well, we can turn this around. Imagine you're having lunch with somebody, and at a certain point, you get the feeling they're trying to figure out what stage you're in. Goodness gracious, what the category is out, but whatever. I think pretty soon that lunch wouldn't be particularly rewarding. Well, it's the same sort of principle here. Let's look at, we're out of time, but I want to look at a couple of these and then do a quick closing. I just mentioned there the mirroring by suggesting that Brooke, in this case, was matching the cadence and the tone in which the lady said, my sister's a goddamn son of a bitch. Okay, it's not just that you go, oh, your sister was a goddamn son of a bitch? Well, I mean, that's a little chirpy, right? That's not how she offered it. So Brooke was not only rephrasing the words, the vocabulary, she was matching the way it was presented emotionally and the tone of voice, the speed, all of those things, including right down to the body posture. These are things that suggest to the other people that we're deeply in tune with them. And guess where does that take us? That take us back to our primary caregivers when we were doing what? Imitating our mothers, and they were imitating us. And we, the next thing you know, we're in complete sort of synchronization to where who knows who's who, because we've blended into each other's lives in a completely satisfying way. Well, this is true for all of our lives at all times. Think of your most intimately meaningful moments. What happens? 2 people start getting into a kind of empathic resonance, and the next thing you know, they're one person in a way. And this is what the techniques of validation enable. Finally, and I'll close with this, this is the crucial point really, is that behind these behaviors, we should assume, number one, there's a reason. These are not just symptoms of neurons. It's not just brain misfiring here. There's a reason, and that reason almost certainly has something to do with a need, and it's almost certainly a need that's seeking to be met, which is to say it's an unmet need. If we assume that there's an unmet need behind behavior, then we're able to offer ourselves as a kind of listening and a friend in which that person can communicate, if not the need directly, then the feelings related to that need. And when we allow someone to do that, it changes their need, because now they've at least satisfied the need to communicate their need. And that's a huge gain. Often there's not anything we can do to change the circumstances, but we can always make ourselves available so that another person can share what that situation is. And that goes a long way to making some things better when it doesn't make everything better. I want to close by saying that none of this can be faked. None of this can be done as if we were carrying out a script. One thing I think we can agree, Naomi was completely integrated. It was all holistic. This is not something that someone can do overnight, but nevertheless, I do think that it's ways that we can be better by learning these kinds of things. But then at the end of the day, if nothing else, you can always say to yourself, I can love this person that I'm about to talk to, and I can take it for granted that they have a reason, even a reason I don't understand is a reason, and I cannot be dismissive or condescending toward them. I can offer my face as a mirror in which they see somebody that is worthy, somebody that belongs, and somebody that is loved. If I just offer my face in that way, I will have gone a long way to being an expert in communicating with someone with dementia. Everybody, I want to thank you for being here today. I get a lot of joy out of just being able to share and seeing some of you again and again. That's wonderful. I look forward to seeing you next week. We'll have our finale and explore caregiving as something of a life practice and a life calling. Bill, I want to thank you for all the behind the scenes that make this possible. Sunnyview Front Porch. This is an unusual, I think, offering, and I appreciate their vision. I appreciate Richard and Jean making it financially possible. Guys, see you next Thursday.
Thank you, Michael. We'll get the email out with the video from today and the video from last week. The first week will come off, and then in that same email will be the invitation for next week for the finale. I hope you all got a lot out of this today like I did, and look forward to seeing you all next week. Thank you.
See you guys.